I've been saying it since pretty much the beginning of this podcast, which is look for opportunities of most growth. And don't want to repeat myself ad nauseum, but it's really hard to remember in the moment when somebody offers you more money to jump ship. Like right now in the Great Resignation, people are poaching people right and left. They're offering you more money. Um, the path of most growth, and when you're looking at a company, the number one thing you should be thinking about is, are these my people? And I somebody told me that along the way, and that has never steered me wrong. Every time I thought I could learn something here, I can apply this to my career later. This is a huge step jump, but this feels really weird. Every time it felt like they weren't my people, things went horribly wrong. I had to unravel it for a while. And when it felt like my culture, everything felt right.
Everyone, this is Devin Miller here with another episode of The Inventive Journey. I'm your host, Devin Miller, the serial entrepreneur that's grown several startups into 7 and 8-figure businesses, as well as a founder and CEO of Miller IP Law, where he helps startups and small businesses with their patents and trademarks. If you ever need help with yours, just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat. We're always here to help. Now, today we've got another great guest on the podcast, Steve Pockross. And Steve went to high school in Denver, Colorado. Then went and got into liberal arts in an East Coast school. Became obsessed in Latin America, or with Latin America, in Latin America, and spent about a year in Chile. Got a job as a journalist there. Came back, did a tour guide for a while, and then did economic development. And then got into housing development for economic development, so housing portion of that. Spent another year in Brazil with a bank. Then got an MBA and went and worked for Kellogg. And after that, did his first startup. So with that much as introduction, welcome on the podcast, Steve.
Thanks so much. Great to be here.
Absolutely. So I just took a much longer journey and condensed into the 30-second version, but let's unpack that a bit. So tell us how your journey got started going to high school in Denver, Colorado.
Cool. Well, the problem with getting older is the older you get, the longer your story becomes, and the more you have to condense it. So I appreciate you condensing it like you did. Um,
Absolutely.
so super lucky to grow up in Denver in the 80s. Pretty formative time to be here. Kind of now that Stranger Things is a cultural phenomenon, I think gives those of you who did not grow up in the 80s a feel for what it was like to kind of just be able to go absolutely anywhere with no supervision whatsoever. And I grew up kind of in the outskirts of town in a city called Aurora, which is actually has more people than Denver. And went to a public high school that was it was really economically and racially mixed, which was really helpful and learning more experiences and getting more exposure at an early age. There was also some kind of traumatic violence at my high school. The Chuck E. Cheese murder occurred 2 years after I left there, and was really impactful as far as just realizing how close those type of things could be. And so a lot of those, unfortunately, uh, a lot of those big things happened in Denver and metro area. And so we all keep those are pretty formative in how you think about life. Um, Really interesting to go to public school, really large school. Then I got to go to then I had how did I have it? I did we did very well at a large public school, and then I got exposure to what it was like to go to an elite small liberal arts school in the East Coast and got my ass seriously kicked. Saw what it was like when the people that you went to school with got an incredibly different and much more privileged upbringing as far as, and I'm not saying mine wasn't privileged. I'm just saying like it's very different from the boarding school aspect of life of like these guys have been trained from an early age to completely destroy academics, and they completely do. And so it was really interesting to go from highs to lows and teaches you a lot about yourself. Liberal arts was a really big deal and a big part of my learning, which was when I explain my path, you'll see that most of my choices are based on the path of most interest and most learning. Where can I go to learn the most, get the most new experiences, open up my eyes to things, and grow as much as I can, as opposed to opportunities to make the most salary and have the highest title that I possibly can. That decision-making process eventually worked out for me, but it was definitely not easy along the way. Can be a harder path to go. I think liberal arts was a great way to figure that out. You get exposed to dozens of different topics, go really deep in them, figure out how to think critically about them, And they could be anything from, I took a class in women in Buddhist literature. I took a class on the founding of the New Testament, even though I'm Jewish. I found that fascinating. Um, Latin American history, the development of Africa, all of these type of things, like they just get into your skull and it helps you think about what else you might want to be interested in for the rest of your life, which I think can help you in every pursuit. Because now when I hire people at my startup, the first thing I look for is curiosity in problems that you don't currently have. And so if you're looking to figure out how could this be better? Why do we do things this way? You'll always be critically thinking about how our company could be better, and as opposed to what do you need to do to fill out your task that day. And that's how startups grow and become successful. So that is the super condensed version of way too many decades of life.
So now I'm going to or circle back just a little bit because you breezed through a couple of things which I thought were interesting. So going back to after college, you got the liberal arts, you became, interested in a lot of the Latin America things. And so you went down to Chile. And I think initially you worked as a journalist for a period of time.
So the first thing I did in Chile is I actually went down there as a study abroad program, and my university was very picky, Wesleyan University. On They did not let me do semester at sea, and it was not a Latin American party where you showed up and you hung out with other Americans in another country. Anywhere that they permitted you to go, you would have to directly enroll in the Latin American University in Spanish for all your classes, having only taken classroom Spanish before that. And so Chile was the most interesting university that was available to me, and it was a really intense time. It was, for those of you who don't follow Latin American politics, and I can't imagine as many of you do as I do, that Chile was under a really brutal dictatorship for 20 years, incredibly repressive fascist dictatorship, lots of horrible things happening, and the company was just, or the country was just transitioning out of that dictatorship, but the dictator was still head of the military when I moved down there. And so it was a really new opening, and it had been a completely closed society for like 20 years. And I went to the liberal university down there called the University of Chile, and directly enrolled in classes with only Chilean students. And it blew my mind. The way that Chilean classes were taught were completely different, not just like what the subjects were, but how the classes were taught. The fact that I only understood about a third of it for the first 3 months was probably influenced that. And then I learned to love the experience so much. I'm sure anybody who's moved to a new country knows that the beginning is it's rocky. You start with your honeymoon phase, everything is cool and interesting, and phase two, which I'll call months 4 to 6, and I think anybody with your Utah crew who is part of this audience will probably be deeply familiar with all of this. Months 4 to 6, maybe 4 to 8, are all about why does everyone do everything so stupidly? Why don't they do it like I should do it? And so it's a rocky ride. But once I made through that, there were very few there were very few Spanish and English speakers down there. And so I became a big fish in a very small pond. And so even though I was 20 years old, I could take opportunities to do work that you couldn't do anywhere else. And so there was a British economics magazine called the South Pacific Mail, that where I got hired as a 20-year-old to interview all the CEOs of the leading companies of Chile. And I would go in there and they would think they would definitely didn't think I was there to interview them, but it gave me incredible access. And it also taught me that, one, writing's really hard. Interviewing's not that hard for me. Writing's really hard for me. And now I run a writing company. So it gave me deep perspective and a great background in the fact that I really appreciate writing and I want more of it in this world, but I'm not going to be the one who's leading it. And that was a pretty formative experience.
I would say no, and I think that sounds like it. And I think anytime you have an opportunity to go abroad, especially in a culture that's or significantly different than what you're accustomed to, it always gives you a different perspective and always it gives you a lot of insight. So now you went to Chile, did the exchange, you had an opportunity to get some access to that. I think after that you did a tour guide for a period of time. Is that right?
Yeah, so then I came back and I graduated. I eventually graduated a little bit late from my university. And one of the other things about exposing yourselves to lots of new things is people, if you can do this, you can help find what's the best fit for you and what motivates you most in the world. But you'll also run into people who have really good ideas for you of what you should be doing based on your personality and what they get to know about you that you would never choose before. This happens so much in startups, which is why I highly recommend both getting passionate, finding companies that you're passionate in versus trying to choose a stock winner. And the other is moving around to keep yourself fresh every few years as you're starting your journey. This might be less so as you start to expand. And so I ran into one of my friends in Chile, had been a tour guide of the United States. And she had led 3-week tours from New York to LA and back, going across the Southwest into Mexico, through New Orleans. And I got hired to be a tour guide for 6 months of the United States, of cities that I'd never been to, with no cell phones. All I had was a map. I slept on top of the van, and I got to lead a bunch of tourists and act like I was in charge at 22 years old, and that they should really listen to everything I say. And so, a few of those things, being a tour guide is not that different from being a startup CEO. There's a lot in common there, which is one, you need to have an idea of where the map is, even if you don't know what the map is, and don't let them know that you don't know what the map is. Two is motivating everybody to be psyched up on your tour is so much more important than actually doing anything else. If you tell them that something is the best and it turns out to be pretty good, and they stay really positively motivated versus telling them this is going to be an 8-hour driving day, this is going to suck, they are going to think that it sucks the entire time. And the third is really giving people honest options, but is also guiding them towards them choosing it themselves. So I had this example of when I was told to go to Dollywood when I was driving through the Smoky Mountains, and nobody's really watching me. There's no cell phones, there's no contact, and I'm alone as a 22-year-old with completely in charge of these 13 people. And I said, we are one of the most beautiful places in the entire world. We have a unique opportunity. We could go for a hike in the Smoky Mountains, first national park in the United States, beautiful, unprecedented views, and very few people come here because most people go to Dollywood. So Dollywood is what's on our tour, but we have a chance to see black bears, which very few tourists get to see. You guys let me know. I'm here for you. We got to go see black bears.
Sounds like a great sales pitch. I want to go and see it. So now you do the tour guide for a period of time and just kind of continuing with that. Then you got into economic development. And I think that led you to do, housing. And you also at some point went down to Brazil or returned down to kind of South America and went to Brazil. So how did you what took you from doing tour guides and convincing people that hiking is awesome to getting more into economic development?
These are very good questions that I ask myself a lot. So I'll try to answer them honestly and also tell like here's the themes that are real and here's the themes that you only say when walk me through your resume and you try to make your resume look like it makes more sense than it does. And so one of the things that I think is a big theme is in all of startups, but also something that I'm attracted to is you take something that's working in a different industry and you apply it in a new innovative way to something that you're more interested in or into a new field. And I read somewhere along the way, which I'm looking for verification of, that the majority of Nobel Prize winners have taken some innovation from one field and applied it to another. And I think that's really cool because that's what great startups do too. It also lowers your risk profile and it helps you innovate in a much more, how do we say, a higher effectiveness way. And so one of the big movements that I was attracted to, I've always been attracted to social movements and helping people develop, giving people more opportunities to develop themselves. And so one of the big movements that I became passionate about was economic development finance. It's community development finance is the term for it. And the idea of using innovative methods of finance to help people get more economic opportunity. A lot of that happens in affordable housing. How do you take the extra layer of risk away from the investors so you can actually do more housing? I actually was part of the project team that built the affordable housing investment bank of Utah is one of the things that I did. So how do you create more of those opportunities and get more money into affordable housing so you can build more projects, so you can build more units? And another was getting excited about small business development and micro lending. And so all of these, I did each of these for a few years, led me to work for the Brazilian Development Bank for a consulting firm for why is microlending the opportunity to give smaller loans to people who normally wouldn't qualify to have because they had too much risk to actually have access to capital, to give them that access to capital so they could build their own future, they could build their own entrepreneurial endeavors. why was it working in the rest of Latin America but not in Brazil? And so we worked on that for a year. Then I went to business school thinking this is all I want to do in my entire life. I want to do this internationally. I now speak Spanish. I speak Portuguese. I speak English. I have an MBA in finance and marketing. Everyone's going to love me. And then I graduated in 2002 at the bottom of the market. And we had the lowest number of Kellogg MBAs hired into the workforce in the history of Kellogg. We were we were ranked like number one in the world in the business school that year, and I didn't have a job for 9 months. And there's so much to this story, which is to everybody's story, which is in part, I think the important thing is being pretty honest with yourself is how much is you being pretty great and being rewarded for the things you do well, and how much of it is luck and running into opportunities. And man, that was a rough one. So it took a little while to overcome from that before I joined my first startup and realized the combination of the passion of my community development, of doing good and having people benefit from it, and doing something innovative and disruptive meets resources and super brilliant teams that are ready to build things out with technology. And that combination has been something that I, I am absolutely obsessed with for the last 20 years.
That's awesome. No, I think that's definitely so. Now, backing up just one thing that you mentioned. So you got the MBA, and I think you worked with Kellogg for a period of time after you graduated. Is that right?
So Kellogg's the name of the business school.
Okay, got
So
it.
it's
So,
Northwestern University's business school is called.
all right, that's where I got off. So,
If you're not into the whole law school thing and more the business school thing, and
I
trust me,
actually got both. So I've actually
you
got
have
an
both.
MBA degree as well as a law degree. So I
Oh
went both
man,
routes. So
I don't
I
know
can I
any
can
of the
bash on
names.
I can bash on both sides.
They both have
Um,
terrible names, all named after like after old men who died and gave a lot of money, and now we don't remember any of them.
well, fair enough. So now, so you came out of MBA school now. So did you go right into doing your startup, and how did you kind of get the idea for the startup, or kind of what was the transition after you got the MBA?
Cool. So brevity of time. I decided when you don't know exactly what you want to do with your career and a lot less opportunities are there, the path is to do something that gets you along the path, which is kind of like if you don't have a plan, then the next step is to create a plan for a plan. And so my plan for a plan was develop more finance capabilities, learn more about lending, get some sort of credibility behind me. And I ended up after 9 months of looking, and my it was brutal. Like I was like the final one or two interviewees for so many companies I was excited about. They went from like Cliff Bar's product innovation person all over the place to cool international nonprofits. And I ended up working for HSBC's subprime credit card marketing group, which is so different from everything else I had. And I had lots of reservations about working for the man, taking over the, all of these type of things. And the weirdest thing was how much I loved that job. I worked for somebody that I deeply respected, had a great time with, learned a lot from, who I just met with for coffee in San Francisco 2 days ago. Um, and I learned working for someone awesome is better than almost anything else. So when you're looking at your list of all the things, your company, your growth, your compensation, everyone says it's the key to happiness, but it really was. Two was I love marketing. I thought I was supposed to be a finance person. I took all these classes where I wasn't really, it's not really my favorite thing. All of us can learn to do a lot of things, but wow, marketing and learning how humans behave when you change all the variables in their world from what you offer them to the price point to what the product is described as to how do you close the conversation. That to me is fascinating because humans don't behave rationally, and you have to introduce them in a communication cycle to something that they react to, but you're trying to base that on something that's not rational. And so that really transformed my world. And I learned that subprime credit cards is not that different from community economic development finance. They're really all along a continuum of offering more access to capital. Now, if you do it in an ethical way, is really the important thing. And that's a really fine gray line. So I did that for a year. That was enough. I was commuting 3 hours each direction and had to get a place close to, it was in Salinas, California, in a lettuce field, which is a really strange place for an international global finance headquarters. Um, and then I ran into Live Ops, so we're eventually getting to the story that's relevant to this conversation, which is the first startup that I worked for. I did not start it. I was about employee 30, 35, and it was a marketplace plus SaaS company that you leveraged a network of 20,000 home-based freelancers to be call center agents before we really use the jargon that we use today, and we won't go into that because we'll just stick with what we use now. But we had a unique technology platform that could route a call to anyone in the world based on their performance of any metrics we wanted to find and their availability, record the call, put it all, and then really built an entire meritocracy system that delivered a really unique product, which is the ability to create a 20,000 person sales call center for 30 minutes and then take it down, as opposed to hiring someone 8 hours a day. And so what that does on a marketing side is you take the SaaS, you take a business model, you take the combination of remote talent, being able to curate them in a technology platform, and you can now have be available anytime your client wants to talk to you, as opposed to trying to get your client to talk to you when you're available. And that changed the whole dynamic. That grew to about $150 million company with lots of the original Netscape guys. I was in charge of building new businesses with this combination. So yada, 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 did about 5, 6 more startups. The first one went so well that I thought all of them would always go well. And it turns out that's not how it works. And eventually, when I moved back to Denver, when second child was on the way from San Francisco, I lived in San Francisco for about 15 years. Um, there was a company that started Verblio. Two of the founders, one was a journalist, and they had looked at the live ops model, and they talked to me early on when I moved to Denver about like how to build this company. And they did a tremendous job of building a couple $1 million business that provided content to small businesses as a way to compete against the big guys in SEO and this new marketing channel that was being developed. And it really had a lot of the passion of the startups and doing right by people and creating economic opportunity for people, at the same time that it all had all of the startup goals of how do you win and create something disruptive for marketers out there. I took it over 6 years ago. We've grown about 600%, fully bootstrapped. We're doing about $1 million a month right now. We create 100. We're on path for 120,000 pieces of unique content this year, mostly written content, some video, and we give pretty great economic opportunity to about 1,000 writers every month.
Definitely sounds like a great business, and and I smiled just at the, just because you think your first startup is, went well or was easy, quote unquote, doesn't mean they're all going to be that way. And I think that every time you kind of just see, well, I've got this startup thing figured out, or I've cracked the nut, or I've cracked the secret sauce, and now I can replicate that, and I can do it over here, and I do it over here. And there are things you learn that give you an advantage, and you learn the mistakes along the way. But every industry and every business is different, and you have different things, and just because it worked over here doesn't mean it works over here. You have to pivot and adjust. And so I think there was a lot of truth in that. Well, as we now kind of reach the present day of where your journey is at, and kind of where it's led to you, it's a great time to go or to jump to the two questions I always ask at the end of each episode. So the first question I always ask is, along your journey, what was the worst business decision you ever made, and what'd you learn from it?
So this is funny based on everything I just said about taking the path of most exploration, which is if you look back at it, when I was doing these nonprofits that I was excited about in San Francisco in the late 90s, that was the time of the greatest wealth accumulation in the history of mankind. And so here I am in a really unique period of history, and all of my friends are doing these startups and they're jumping to VP and they're going from place to place. And I thought I was doing the most learning, and it's less about the money than about the chance that you can accelerate your learning process and your opportunities so much more quickly if you realize what trend you're living at the time. And I didn't care about exploring any other trend. I liked where I was, and I really should have experimented a little more with being part one of the late 90s startup companies in San Francisco. I was in the right place at the right time, and everything worked out, and I'm happy to where I am. I think it's one of those human things that nobody says, "Hey, I had this experience and I wish I'd never had it." Everyone always says, of course I appreciate those experiences. I value it more now, even though blah blah blah. But man, I really should have been more aware of the trend I was and taken advantage of a more of a growth learning opportunity than I did.
No, and I think that, that is always, everyone's like, well, and I've had our guests on, I always push back that, there's no mistakes, or there isn't any bad decisions, only ones you learn from. I'm like, no, there are some things that if I could go
Yeah.
back, I would probably change it. Yes, I learned from it. Yes, it may have improved me as a person. I still wouldn't want to or have to go through that again, nor do I think it was beneficial, and there would have been a better decision I could have made. So I agree with you on that front. Second question I always ask is, if you're talking to somebody that's just getting into a startup or a small business, what'd be the one piece of advice you give them?
So I've been saying it since pretty much the beginning of this podcast, which is look for opportunities of most growth. And Don't want to repeat myself ad nauseum, but it's really hard to remember in the moment when somebody offers you more money to jump ship. Like right now in the Great Resignation, people are poaching people right and left. They're offering you more money. Um, the path of most growth, and when you're looking at a company, the number one thing you should be thinking about is, are these my people? And somebody told me that along the way, and that has never steered me wrong. Every time I thought I could learn something here, I can apply this to my career later. This is a huge step jump, but this feels really weird. Every time it felt like they weren't my people, things went horribly wrong. I had to unravel it for a while. And when it felt like my culture, everything felt right.
Oh, and I think there's a lot of truth to that. And I think, sometimes you will deceive yourself or talk yourself, and well, this culture may not, but it's a really good opportunity. It's a really fun and exciting technology. And yet, if you don't fit with the culture, you're just not going to lie. It's because it's not fun. And I'm not saying that any business, whether you work for someone else or you're on, is all fun and it's just you love going in the office every day and everything goes perfectly and there is never a bad day. I don't know that I subscribe to find your passion, over work a day in your life. There's some still days that you still work, but I think if you can find that fit, find that culture and find what you enjoy, the balance of, hey, yes, there are still bad days, yes, there are not fun days, it's still something you much more enjoy and you fit and you're going to thrive in a lot better. So I definitely agree on that. Well, as we wrap up, if people want to reach out to you, they want to be a customer, they want to be a client, they want to be an employee, they want to be an investor, they want to be your next best friend, any or all of the above, what's the best way to reach out to you, contact you, or find out more?
Wow, so many different ways. If you are interested in Verblio, if you're looking for content creation, high quality content at scale for any niche, we're at verblio.com, verblio.com. We are a writing company. We try to make all of the content as engaging possible. If you don't smile or laugh at least once per page, I'll be very upset. You can find me most easily. You can either write me at steve@verblio.com or follow me on LinkedIn at Spockross, Spockross, my first letter and last name. I post a lot. You can also follow my podcast there. I have a Yes and Marketing, which is like a liberal arts approach to marketing, which great ideas can come from anywhere, and best practices. Marketing is the best place. Marketing is amazing to me because best practices, if you follow them in marketing, you lose. So you have to get inspiration from other places. And that is called Yes in Marketing on all your major channels. And I think that should cover it.
All right, well, definitely plenty of ways to reach out, connect with you, and a lot of great resources there, so definitely encourage people to do so. Well, thank you again for coming on the podcast. It's been a pleasure. Now, for all of you that are listeners, if you have your own journey to tell and you'd like to be a guest on the podcast, we'd love to have you. So just go to inventiveguest.com and apply to be on the show. A couple more things as listeners, make sure to click share, subscribe, leave us a review because we want to make sure that everyone finds out about all these awesome episodes. And last but not least, if you ever need help with patents, trademarks, or anything else with your startup or your small business, just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat, and we're always here to help. Thank you again, Steve, for coming on the podcast, and wish the next leg of your journey even better than the last.
Thanks so much. It was great to be here. Thanks for having me.